Hey, all right, learning activity 4. So in Jacobs, they have 3 stages of group. I'm going to go into 4. So this includes Jacobs and it takes it into a more practical way of looking at groups. So a couple things to start out. When you are looking at people in a group, you have to know that they are two separate yet equal forces. There's character pathology going on, and there's group pathology going on. So it looks like this. Don't assume that they are doing X, Y, Z because of this or because of this. Always attune first. And you'll then pick up what's causing the real issues. So I always attune first, and I'm just curious about, hey, I noticed that you jumped in when Susie was talking about being physically abused, and I'm just curious what that is. If you would like, explain that to me. So in my head, I have group could be that he isn't feeling like the group is safe enough to contain what Susie is talking about physically. Character-wise, he has no separation and feels like other people can't handle their emotions. So those are the 2 things that are in my mind. But they're bracketed off, and I'm just gonna pay attention to what the feelings are for why he jumped in. So just keep that in mind as we're going to talk about the different stages of group. So that's why it's really important to understand these stages, because you'll know what stage they're in, and what is coming from the group dynamic and what's coming from a character dynamic. So hopefully that explains why group is just a little different of an animal, and why it's important to learn this. Because when I initially learned it, it was like, oh yeah. Initial stage, transition stage, working stage, end stage. That's stuff that I don't really need to know. It's nice fluff for the back of my mind. And then I began to see this stuff, and I'm like, I thought that was an attachment problem. It's because they haven't shared this at all with anyone ever in their lives, and they were just scared. That's normal. So I start paying attention more to what the group stage that this person might be in looks like, so I can tell that, or what the fears are in certain stages, so I can tell if it's a group thing or if it is a character thing. So hopefully that helps. All right. So the first stage is the initial stage of group. It is the norming stage of group. It is where they are figuring out what is acceptable and what is not acceptable. In this group, do we get vulnerable? Do we get real? In this group, do we yell at each other or do we cuss? In this group, do we challenge the leader or do we not challenge the leader? Do we test the atmosphere? Do we get acquainted in the beginning or do we just jump in and do our work? So they're really just testing out who they are, what the group is. So if you have somebody that is having a difficult time with this, I will sometimes pull them out and talk with them individually. And it just is, what is your experience of the group? And I slow my speech down just like that so that it brings their anxiety down. Beautiful NLP technique, just slowing down what you're saying. So then you get the real stuff for what's going on. All right, so then here's the main fears that group members will experience. So I pay attention to these if they're a new group member. So here's kind of an interesting point of this whole group topic. So they teach group like each group goes through each one of these stages. Here's the thing. I think I've run maybe 2 groups that the people that start at the beginning and all end together at the end. It is usually an open group where there's a new person every day. So It is not that the group will go through each stage necessarily. It's that the group members will orient to each stage at a different point. So ideally, the whole group is or a majority of the group is at a certain level, and then there's some stragglers that are still trying to get up to that level. So, all right, so common fears experienced by group members: anxiety over being accepted and rejected, concern about the judgment of others, afraid of appearing stupid, concerns about not fitting into the group, not knowing what's expected, concern over communicating feelings and thoughts effectively. And then the second stage is transition stage of group. So it's when they're moving from norming into the working or storming stage. So this is very important. It's where they're testing out the waters of how deep they can go, how deep they can go, and how deep they can go. Because sometimes we just can't go any deeper without someone else in the room that's going to meet a relational need that will allow us to go deeper. So that's why I will go to the group quite a bit and ask them what they're feeling in their chest, because what that is it builds this permission to go deeper, that they're not alone in that feeling. It takes away that paranoia, kind of what we saw last night in the group where Carolyn was talking and I felt that relief of paranoia. That happens to like just about everyone, especially when they're on the spot and they're supposed to work on their stuff in a court mandated group. Everyone's paranoid. So, all right, so the transition stage, the main signs of or common fears are fear of making a fool of oneself, fear of emptiness, fear of losing control, fear of being too emotional, fear of self-disclosure, fear of taking too much of the group's time, fear of being judged. So, here's an interesting thing. If someone comes in and they have a fear of taking too much of the group's time, if it's like loud, like they say that stuff out loud, then no one goes into the transition stage that quickly. If they do, there's character stuff going on. So you can kind of chalk that up to that's not transition stage stuff. That's how they have been from day one. That's a character thing. So that's another thing you can watch for, is that if they're doing the stuff of the advanced level in the first group, then that's character stuff. That's not necessarily the safety of the group. They just mold really well to the environment. So or it's something else. So I explore that whenever they bring that stuff up. If they bring up some advanced common fears, I'm exploring that right away. Tell me about the fear of taking up too much of the group's time. That sounds like that has some feelings to it. Yeah. So, all right. Then we go into working stage or storming stage of group. So this is where they're doing the work. There's both support and challenge to take risks in the group. So the leader uses a variety of interventions. So it's just where we're pushing. So we're going to be in that stage all the time. If you're running a continuous group, there's always going to be people that are in that stage. So just know that you'll always be in the working stage, unless it's a really tough group or there's a group member that's really holding back. So there's a silent member that's really giving a silent FU and bringing the group out of their flow. So it can ebb and flow very quickly in groups. So whenever that happens, I'm finding who's doing that stuff, and I'm either getting them to move their body so that it's not so distracting by just paying attention to the non-visual or the non-verbals of it, or I'm staying with them and helping them feel more comfortable. What do you need from the group? So don't let them derail it. If they start derailing it, just notice their visuals like 10 times and they'll stop. It's great. It's like a loophole. All right, so some group behaviors at the working stage. Or fears. Some of the fears. Disclosure versus anonymity. Honesty versus superficiality. Spontaneity versus control. Acceptance versus rejection. Cohesion versus fragmentation. you will see a real pull and a polarity if they're in that working stage, where they're really leaning into one side or the other as they're exploring their issues, and it's an internal conflict. All right, so then there's the ending stage. So there's just tasks in this stage. It's just a saying goodbye, dealing with feelings of leaving and separating, dealing with unfinished business, reviewing the group experience, practice for behavioral change, giving and receiving feedback. You will do this in every group you run. You may not do the other things in some groups, like educational groups and stuff. You will always do this one. Always do this. What has it been like? If you were a baby bean plant when you came in, tell us how you grew with this experience, and they'll let you know what some of the ingredients were that came into their soil to help them to grow in this group. So, all right. So that is what objective number 4 is of week 1. And then, of course, that's not all, because we wouldn't want you to get out of this without a 3 to 5 page paper. So I explained this last night when we talked, that we want you to define in a paragraph 2 to 5 sentences each of Yalom's 12 curative factors. So this will be a very important part for you to know, because you'll be able to point this stuff out to the group. And what that does, or inject it into the group, what that does is it transforms the group, as you pointed out. So it will give you just a variety of things that you can say to the group that you want to see or that you are seeing. Those are like kind of empty pit attunement stuff, man. Like if they're not giving you anything, or it's hard to track where they're going, I then go to the group and analyze the group. So it's a vacillating between a lot of times. All right, so second, after describing the curative factors, pick 4 to analyze in the light of Scripture. So find in the Scripture how these are brought, how these are things that came years before Yalom, more or less. All right, and then watch the video. I would watch the video before I do the paper. It'll help you kind of sync up your mind and your objectives for what you want to get out of it. And then, as always, turn the paper in by midnight on Sunday. All right, good luck, guys. You got this. Bye.